Have you ever wondered what happens when a champion is abandoned? Today, we share Rex's story, an abandoned dog saved by a brave girl. Subscribe, hit the bell, and comment where you're watching from. Let's dive in. The sun hung low over the golden hills of Northern California, casting long shadows across the grounds of the prestigious annual Canine Championship. The crowd erupted in applause as Richard Blake, a man in his late 40s with neatly combed silver hair and an impeccable navy blue suit, strode across the field, his prized German shepherd, Rex, trotting beside him. Rex was a magnificent animal, sleek black and tan coat, intelligent amber eyes, and a posture that screamed discipline and pride. Richard had built his reputation not only as a ruthless businessman in the real estate industry, but also as a champion handler in the competitive dog circuit. Rex was his crown jewel, having brought him numerous accolades and the envy of his peers. However, Richard's love for Rex was far from genuine. For him, Rex was an asset, a tool to cement his image as a winner. That day, things took an unexpected turn. As Rex leapt over the final obstacle in the agility course, his landing went awry. A sharp yelp echoed through the arena, silencing the crowd. Richard's eyes narrowed as he watched Rex limp toward him, favoring his left hind leg. "Damn it, Rex," Richard hissed under his breath, crouching down to inspect the dog. The veterinarian on site confirmed the worst. Rex had torn a ligament in his leg, a severe injury for a working dog. "He'll need surgery and months of rest and rehabilitation," the vet explained, her tone empathetic. Richard's expression hardened. Months of rest meant months of no competitions, no glory, and mounting medical expenses. As the crowd dispersed, he led Rex to the back of his sleek black SUV. He stood there for a moment, staring at the dog who had once been his pride. "You're useless to me now," he muttered coldly, slamming the door shut. The following morning, Richard drove to a desolate area outside the city, a dry, dusty stretch of land near a forested creek. He pulled over, yanked Rex's leash, and opened the door. "Out," he barked. Rex hesitated, his injured leg making movement painful. Richard's patience wore thin as he roughly pulled the leash, forcing Rex to stumble out of the car. The dog looked up at him, confusion and trust evident in his eyes. "This is it for you, buddy," Richard said, avoiding Rex's gaze. "You'll figure it out. You're a survivor." Rex whimpered softly as Richard removed his collar, tossing it into the trunk. Without another word, Richard got back into the car and sped off, leaving a cloud of dust and a betrayed dog in his wake. Rex limped through the barren terrain, thirsty, hungry, and in pain. Despite his training and strong instincts, the sudden abandonment left him disoriented. He wandered aimlessly, his energy fading with every step. Night fell, and the temperature dropped, but Rex kept moving, guided only by the faint sound of running water. The sun was just beginning to rise over the sprawling Texas countryside, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and orange. Emma Johnson, an 11-year-old girl with wavy auburn hair and freckles scattered across her cheeks, trudged through the tall grass near her family's modest farmhouse. She carried a rusted metal bucket in one hand, heading toward the nearby creek to fetch water, a morning chore she had grown used to. Emma was a curious and kind-hearted child, often wandering off to explore the woods near her home. This morning felt no different, though the summer heat was already creeping in, promising another sweltering day. As she approached the creek, a faint rustling sound caught her attention. She froze, her hazel eyes scanning the brush. "Probably just a raccoon," she whispered to herself, taking another cautious step forward. The sound grew louder, followed by a low, pitiful whine. Emma's heart quickened. Carefully setting her bucket down, she pushed aside the tall grass to reveal the source of the noise. There, lying in the dirt near the creek, was a German shepherd. His coat was matted with dirt, and his left hind leg was swollen and bent unnaturally. Emma gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. The dog's amber eyes met hers, filled with a mixture of pain and trust. "Oh my gosh, you poor thing," Emma murmured, dropping to her knees. The dog whimpered but didn't move, his body trembling. Emma extended a hand cautiously. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you," Rex's ears twitched at her gentle tone. Slowly, he sniffed her hand, his nose cold against her skin. "You're hurt really bad," she said softly, running her fingers over his head. Her heart ached at the sight of the injured animal. "Don't worry. I'll take care of you." Emma stood and scanned the area, her mind racing. She knew carrying the large dog would be impossible. "Stay here," she said, her voice firm yet soothing. "I'll be right back. I promise." Rex's eyes followed her as she sprinted back toward the farmhouse. By the time she returned, out of breath and carrying an old blanket, the dog hadn't moved. "Okay, big guy," she said, kneeling beside him. "This might hurt a little, but I've got to get you home." She carefully draped the blanket over Rex and began to tug, creating a makeshift sled. The journey back to the farmhouse was slow and exhausting, but Emma didn't complain. Every now and then, she glanced back at Rex, offering him words of encouragement. When she finally reached the porch of her weathered home, her mother, Sarah, stepped outside. Sarah was a practical woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She wiped her hands on her apron and stared at the scene before her, her brow furrowing. "Emma, what on earth is that?" "It's a dog, Mom," Emma panted, her hands on her knees. "He's hurt really bad. I found him by the creek." Sarah crossed her arms. "Emma, we don't have the time or money to take care of a dog right now, especially one that looks like he needs a vet." "Please, Mom," Emma pleaded, her eyes brimming with tears. "He's in so much pain. I couldn't just leave him there." Sarah sighed, glancing at the dog. His chest rose and fell with labored breaths, and he let out a low whimper. "Let me see," a gravelly voice interrupted. Robert, Emma's grandfather, emerged from the house, leaning on his cane. He was a retired rancher with a lifetime of experience caring for animals. His weathered face softened as he crouched beside the dog, inspecting the injury. "He's got a torn ligament, I reckon," Robert said, his voice calm. "Looks like someone abandoned him." "Grandpa, can we keep him?" Emma begged. "At least until he's better." Robert looked at Sarah, who hesitated before nodding reluctantly. "Fine," Sarah said, her tone firm. "But if we're doing this, we're doing it right. And Emma, this is your responsibility." "I promise, Mom. I'll take care of him," Emma said, a wide smile breaking across her face. Emma knelt beside Rex, stroking his head gently. "You're safe now," she whispered. "I'll take care of you." Rex let out a soft sigh, his eyes closing as if finally able to rest. Emma sat cross-legged on the worn wooden floor of her family's living room, a bowl of water and a piece of leftover cornbread in front of Rex. The German Shepherd was still too weak to eat much, but he lapped at the water, his trust in Emma growing with every soft word she spoke. Across the room, Sarah leaned against the kitchen counter, her arms crossed. Her gaze flicked between Emma and Rex, her concern evident. "Emma," Sarah started, her voice low but firm. "I know your heart is in the right place, but this is a lot." Emma looked up, her hazel eyes filled with determination. "Mom, he needs us. Look at him. Someone left him to die. We can't just give up on him." Sarah sighed, rubbing her temples. "It's not about giving up. It's about being realistic. We're barely making ends meet as it is. Vet bills, extra food. I don't know how we can afford this." Robert, sitting in his favorite recliner with a cup of coffee, cleared his throat. "The girl has a point, Sarah. The dog didn't ask to be thrown out like yesterday's garbage. Maybe this is a sign we're supposed to help." "Grandpa gets it," Emma said quickly, her voice hopeful. "We can figure it out together. I'll even take on more chores or help with the farm." Sarah looked between her father and daughter, weighing the situation. She saw the spark of determination in Emma's eyes and the quiet resignation in Rex's. The dog's body trembled as he lay on the blanket Emma had dragged him in on, his swollen legs stretched out awkwardly. Despite the obvious pain, there was something noble in the way he looked at her daughter, a silent gratitude she couldn't ignore. "Fine," Sarah said at last, holding up a hand to stop Emma's cheers. "But this is temporary. And you're responsible for him, Emma. That means feeding him, cleaning up after him, and figuring out how to pay for his care." Emma scrambled to her feet, throwing her arms around her mother. Thank you. Thank you. I promise I'll do everything. Later that evening, as the family gathered around their modest dinner table, the topic of Rex dominated the conversation. He's not just any dog, Robert said, pointing a fork at his plate. I can tell by the way he holds himself, even injured. He's got discipline. This dog's been trained. Trained for what? Emma asked, glancing toward the living room where Rex rested. Could be anything, Robert replied. Guard dog, police work, even competitions. But whoever left him like that didn't deserve him. Sarah frowned. It doesn't matter where he came from. What matters is that he's here now, and we've got to figure out how to help him. I'll make some calls tomorrow, see if any local vets can help on a payment plan. Emma nodded eagerly. I'll help too. I'll find work around the neighborhood or sell lemonade to save up. Robert chuckled, shaking his head. You've got fire in you, kid. Just don't get in over your head. That night, Emma spread a soft quilt on the floor beside Rex and lay down with a pillow, refusing to leave his side. The faint hum of cicadas drifted through the open window as the moon cast a silvery glow over the room. You're going to be okay, boy, Emma whispered, stroking his head. I'll make sure of it. Rex let out a low, contented groan, his eyes fluttering shut. For the first time in what felt like weeks, he wasn't afraid or alone. In the days that followed, the family's hesitations began to melt away. Emma woke early each morning to tend to Rex, feeding him scraps and gently cleaning his wounds under her grandfather's watchful eye. Though the work was hard, Emma never complained. Her determination inspired Robert, who began helping more with Rex's care, teaching Emma old rancher tricks to ease the dog's pain. Even Sarah, initially resistant, found herself softening as she watched Emma's dedication. One evening, she brought home a bag of discounted dog food from the feed store. Thought this might help, she said casually, setting it on the counter. Emma's grin lit up the room. Thanks, Mom. Sarah shrugged, but a small smile tugged at her lips. Despite their efforts, the family couldn't ignore the looming challenges. Rex's recovery would require more than just food and rest. It would demand resources they didn't have. But for now, they were a team, bound together by the unspoken understanding that some things in life, like kindness and second chances, were worth fighting for. The morning sun peeked through the lace curtains of the farmhouse as Emma sat cross-legged on the floor beside Rex. She carefully dipped a clean rag into a bowl of warm water, wringing it out before gently wiping the fur around his swollen leg. The dog flinched slightly but didn't pull away. It's okay, boy, Emma whispered, her voice soft and reassuring. I know it hurts, but this will help. Rex's amber eyes locked onto hers, filled with a mix of pain and trust. He shifted slightly, resting his head on her lap, a small sign that he was beginning to feel safe. Emma's grandfather, Robert, leaned on the doorframe, observing the scene with a proud smile. You've got the touch, kid, he said, his deep voice breaking the quiet. That dog knows you're trying to help him. Emma looked up, brushing a strand of auburn hair from her face. Do you think he'll get better, Grandpa? Robert stepped closer, his weathered face thoughtful. It's going to take time and patience. That leg of his is bad, but he's tough. You just keep doing what you're doing. The days turned into a routine. Every morning, Emma prepared a small breakfast for Rex, carefully balancing his nutrition with advice Robert remembered from his ranching days. She would sit beside him, encouraging him to eat even when his appetite was low. There you go, buddy, she said one morning as Rex tentatively took a bite of the boiled chicken she had prepared. See? Not so bad, right? By the third day, Rex's tail wagged faintly when she entered the room, a sign that his spirit was slowly returning. One afternoon, Emma sat on the porch steps with her mother, Sarah, the two of them watching as Robert worked on the old pickup in the yard. Rex lay nearby, his injured leg stretched out on a blanket. You've been doing good with him, Sarah said, sipping her iced tea. Emma turned to her, surprised. You think so? Sarah nodded. I can see the change in him. He looks happier, healthier even. Emma smiled, her chest swelling with pride. He just needed someone to care about him, Mom. Sarah reached over, placing a hand on her daughter's shoulder. And you've done that. But remember, sweetie, This is a big responsibility. It's not just about helping him now. It's about making sure he has a future. Emma's face grew serious. I'll figure it out. I promise. In the evenings, Emma and Robert worked together to clean and bandage Rex's leg. Robert showed her how to apply a makeshift splint using pieces of wood and an old bandana. You've got to keep it stable, Robert explained, his hands steady as he wrapped the bandage. If he moves it too much, it won't heal right. Emma nodded, watching intently. Do you think someone just left him like this? Robert's jaw tightened. I've seen people do worse, Emma, but that doesn't mean we're gonna let him suffer for it. He's got a second chance now. As the days passed, Rex began to improve. He went from barely moving to hobbling around the yard on 3 legs. Emma cheered every time he took a step. You're doing it, Rex, she exclaimed, clapping her hands. You're getting stronger. Rex wagged his tail, his tongue lolling out in a doggy grin. One evening, as Emma sat on the porch brushing Rex's coat, Sarah joined her, carrying a cup of tea. You know, Sarah began, her voice soft, I wasn't sure about this at first, but seeing how much he means to you, I think we did the right thing. Emma looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. Thank you, Mom, for letting me keep him. Sarah smiled. You're welcome. But remember, he's part of this family now. That means we all have to take care of him. Emma nodded, hugging Rex gently. We will, Mom. I promise. The bond between Emma and Rex grew stronger with each passing day. The dog, once broken and abandoned, began to thrive under her care. And though the road ahead was still uncertain, one thing was clear. Neither Emma nor Rex was giving up on the other. The sleek black SUV rolled to a stop outside a towering glass office building in downtown Los Angeles. Richard Blake stepped out, his tailored suit pristine and his polished leather shoes clicking against the pavement. His jaw was set, his silver hair perfectly combed, and his piercing blue eyes scanned the bustling streets as he made his way inside. Richard had spent weeks trying to shake off the nagging feeling of defeat that lingered after Rex's injury and subsequent abandonment. However, a chance conversation with an acquaintance in the competitive dog circuit had brought the unsettling news that Rex had been spotted alive, miles away in a small Texas town. In his office, Richard stared at the report on his desk, a picture of Rex attached to the file. It was a grainy photo, but the distinctive black and tan coat and alert ears were unmistakable. This can't be right, he muttered to himself, leaning back in his chair. I left that dog in the middle of nowhere. The report included a brief account. A young girl in rural Texas had taken in the injured dog. A witness had seen the dog hobbling in a yard, cared for by a red-haired child. Richard's pride prickled at the thought of someone else claiming what he still considered his property. He picked up the phone and dialed his assistant, his voice sharp. Get me my legal team. Now. Meanwhile, in Texas, Emma sat on the porch swing, tossing small pieces of bread to Rex. His injured leg was still bandaged, but he moved more freely now, his strength returning day by day. Good boy, Emma said, smiling as Rex caught a piece of bread midair. Her joy was interrupted by the sound of a car engine approaching. A shiny black sedan pulled into the dirt driveway, sticking out against the backdrop of their humble farmhouse. Mom, Emma called, her voice edged with unease. Sarah and Robert emerged from the house just as 2 men in suits stepped out of the car. The taller of the two, a man with slicked back hair and a clipboard, approached with a practiced smile. Good afternoon, he said, his voice smooth but impersonal. I'm Mr. Harris, representing Mr. Richard Blake. We're here regarding the dog. The dog? Sarah asked, crossing her arms and narrowing her eyes. Yes, ma'am. That German shepherd, Harris continued, gesturing toward Rex, who had stepped protectively in front of Emma, his ears pricked and his posture alert. He belongs to Mr. Blake. We're here to retrieve him. Emma stepped forward, her voice trembling with anger. Rex doesn't belong to anyone. He was abandoned. He's part of our family now. Harris's smile tightened. I'm afraid that's not for you to decide, young lady. Mr. Blake has documentation proving ownership of the dog. We're prepared to resolve this legally if necessary. Robert stepped down from the porch, his cane tapping against the wooden steps. Listen here, he said, his voice steady but firm. That dog was left to die. My granddaughter found him, nursed him back to health, and gave him a home. You can tell Mr. Blake we're not handing him over. Harris raised his hands in a placating gesture. We're simply trying to avoid unnecessary conflict. Perhaps we can come to an agreement. There's no agreement, Sarah interjected, her tone cold. You tell your boss that if he wants this dog, he'll have to take us to court. Emma knelt beside Rex, wrapping her arms around his neck. You're not taking him, she said defiantly, tears brimming in her eyes. Harris exchanged a glance with his colleague before nodding curtly. Very well. We'll be in touch. As the men returned to their car and drove away, the family stood in tense silence. Rex leaned against Emma, sensing her distress. What are we going to do? Emma asked, looking up at her mother and grandfather. We'll fight, Sarah said firmly, placing a hand on Emma's shoulder. No one's taking Rex from us. That evening, as the family discussed their next steps, the weight of the situation settled heavily over the farmhouse. Emma sat by Rex, her hand resting on his head. Don't worry, Rex, she whispered. We'll protect you, just like you'd protect us. Rex nuzzled her hand. His amber eyes filled with unwavering loyalty. A week later, the tension at the Johnson farmhouse was palpable. Emma tried to go about her routine, caring for Rex and helping around the property, but the fear of losing him loomed over her. Sarah and Robert had spent the past few days making calls to local animal welfare organizations and researching laws about abandoned animals. One hot afternoon, as Emma sat on the porch brushing Rex's coat, the sound of tires crunching on gravel sent her heart racing. She stood, clutching the brush tightly, as a shiny black SUV pulled into the driveway. This time, Richard Blake stepped out himself, flanked by two men in tailored suits. Richard exuded authority. His sharp blue eyes scanned the property, landing on Rex. His expression hardened as he walked toward the porch, his polished shoes kicking up small clouds of dust. Afternoon, Richard said, his tone clipped and businesslike. Sarah stepped outside, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her brow furrowed. Robert followed, leaning heavily on his cane. Can I help you? Sarah asked, her voice wary. I'm Richard Blake, he said, his tone firm. I believe you've got my dog. Emma stepped protectively in front of Rex, who was now standing, his ears pricked and his body tense. Your dog? Sarah repeated, her voice rising. That dog was abandoned. My daughter found him injured and left for dead. Richard's eyes flicked to Emma and then to Rex. I don't know what story you've concocted, but that dog belongs to me. I have papers to prove it. He gestured to one of the men beside him, who produced a folder and handed it to Sarah. She opened it, her hands trembling slightly, and scanned the documents inside. They appeared to be legitimate ownership papers, complete with Rex's registration as a competition dog. I don't care what those papers say, Sarah said, closing the folder and handing it back. You abandoned him. That makes you an unfit owner. Richard's jaw tightened. I didn't abandon him. I made a decision to part ways with an injured animal. There's a difference. Robert stepped forward, his cane planting firmly in the dirt. A decision, he said, his voice low and angry. You threw that dog away like trash because he couldn't win you trophies anymore. That's not a decision. That's cruelty. Richard took a step closer, his imposing presence intimidating, but Robert didn't back down. I don't have time for lectures, Richard snapped. I want the dog, and I'm prepared to take legal action if you don't cooperate. Emma, tears streaming down her face, clung to Rex. You can't take him. He's happy here. He's part of our family now. Richard glanced at her, his expression briefly softening, but he quickly masked it with a look of indifference. I'm sorry, kid, but this isn't up to you. You're wrong, Sarah interjected, her voice sharp. This is up to all of us. And you're not walking away with him. Richard sighed, clearly frustrated. He motioned to his men, who stepped forward. Don't even think about it, Robert said, his grip on the cane tightening. You try to take that dog by force, and I'll make sure every neighbor in a 20-mile radius hears about it. Richard hesitated, realizing that any escalation would only harm his reputation. He turned to his men and nodded. This isn't over, he said, his voice cold. "You'll be hearing from my lawyers." The men returned to their SUV, and Richard cast one last glance at Rex before getting in. As the vehicle disappeared down the driveway, Emma collapsed onto the porch, sobbing into Rex's fur. "They're going to come back," she whispered. Sarah knelt beside her, wrapping an arm around her daughter. "Let them. We'll be ready." Robert looked toward the horizon, his face grim. "We'll need help," he said quietly. "From the neighbors, from anyone who's willing to stand with us." Sarah nodded. "Then we start tomorrow." Rex licked Emma's face, as if reassuring her that he wasn't going anywhere. She hugged him tightly, her resolve strengthening. "We'll fight for you, Rex," she whispered. "No matter what." The following morning, the Johnson family gathered around the kitchen table, the air heavy with determination. Sarah placed a handwritten list on the table, detailing the neighbors and community members they could count on for support. The list wasn't long, but it was enough to start. "We're not going to win this alone," Sarah began, her voice steady. "Richard Blake isn't just some man with an ego. He's got money, power, and a team of lawyers. But what he doesn't have is this community." Emma sat beside her, clutching Rex's collar. "How do we convince them to help?" she asked. Robert leaned back in his chair, the lines on his face deepening as he thought. "By showing them the truth. That dog was abandoned and left to die. We need to make them see who this man really is." Over the next few days, Sarah and Robert made visits to their neighbors, explaining the situation. Many were appalled to hear that a wealthy man like Richard Blake would abandon a dog and then try to reclaim it for his own gain. At the local feed store, Sarah spoke with Mr. Jenkins, an old friend of Robert's and a respected figure in the community. "I've seen people like Blake before," Jenkins said, shaking his head. "Think they can buy their way out of anything? Well, not here. You tell me what you need, and I'll rally the folks around." By the end of the week, word had spread throughout the small Texas town. A meeting was organized in the Johnsons' barn, the space lit with strings of old Christmas lights and packed with neighbors. Emma stood nervously at the front, holding Rex's leash. Her mother gave her a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder. "You're the reason this dog is still alive," Sarah said softly. "They need to hear it from you." Emma nodded and took a deep breath. "Hi, everyone," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "This is Rex. I found him by the creek a few weeks ago. He was hurt and scared, and someone left him there like he didn't matter. But he does matter. He's not just a dog. He's family. And now, someone who gave up on him wants to take him away." The crowd murmured in agreement, their faces reflecting a mix of outrage and sympathy. Emma continued, her voice growing steadier. "Rex didn't give up, even when he was hurt. And I'm not giving up on him either. I need your help to make sure he stays safe." Applause erupted, and Robert stepped forward, raising his hand to quiet the crowd. "This isn't just about a dog," he said, his voice firm. "It's about standing up to people who think their money and power can stomp all over the rest of us. If we don't fight for this, what's next?" Richard Blake, however, was not idle during this time. He arrived in town with his legal team, filing formal papers demanding the return of Rex. The documents accused the Johnsons of harboring stolen property, a claim that infuriated Sarah. "That man abandoned Rex," Sarah snapped, throwing the papers on the table. "And now he wants to call him stolen property? Over my dead body." The legal battle was heating up, and Richard was determined to win. He held a press conference in the town square, flanked by his lawyers and reporters. "Rex is a valuable dog and an integral part of my family," Richard said, his tone carefully measured. "I've always provided the best care for him, and it's my duty to ensure his well-being. I trust the legal system will bring him back where he belongs." Emma watched the broadcast with tears in her eyes. "He doesn't care about Rex," she whispered. "He just cares about winning." Robert placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Then we'll make sure he loses." The community's support continued to grow. People began showing up at the Johnsons' farm with supplies, advice, and even offers to testify against Richard. Mr. Jenkins arranged a small protest outside the town hall, with signs that read "Rex's family" and "Justice for abandoned animals." Richard's sleek SUV pulled up to the scene one afternoon, and he stepped out, his face a mask of irritation. He strode toward the protesters, his lawyers trailing behind him. "This is ridiculous," Richard said, addressing the crowd. "You're being misled by a family who has no legal claim to this dog." Emma stepped forward, clutching Rex's leash tightly. "You left him to die," she shouted, her voice breaking. "And now you want him back like nothing happened?" The crowd quieted, all eyes on Richard. He hesitated, caught off guard by the girl's raw emotion. I made a decision that was best at the time," he stammered. Emma shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "The best decision would have been to take care of him, but you didn't. And now he has us." Richard's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He turned on his heel and walked back to his car. His retreat met with murmurs of disapproval from the crowd. The standoff was far from over, but the lines were drawn. The Johnsons and their community had made it clear. They wouldn't back down. The Johnsons' farmhouse became a hub of activity as the townspeople rallied around Emma and Rex. Cars lined the dirt road leading to the house, their drivers arriving with supplies, encouragement, and stories of their own experiences with animals. The small Texas town had never seen such unity, and it all centered around the injured German shepherd and the determined girl who had saved him. On a warm Saturday morning, the family hosted a community meeting in their barn. The space buzzed with conversation as neighbors filled the makeshift seating of hay bales and folding chairs. The air smelled faintly of sawdust and sweet hay, mingled with the aroma of coffee and pastries donated by Mrs. Jenkins, the owner of the local bakery. Emma stood near the front, nervously holding Rex's leash. The dog sat calmly beside her, his alert ears swiveling to catch the sounds of laughter and chatter. Despite the lingering injury in his leg, Rex's presence was strong, his deep amber eyes scanning the crowd as if he understood the importance of the gathering. "All right, everyone, settle down," Robert said, his voice cutting through the din. He leaned on his cane, his weathered face stern but kind. "We're here to figure out how to stop this Blake fellow from taking Rex." Sarah stepped forward, holding a clipboard. "Here's what we know," she began. "Richard Blake is a powerful man with money and connections. He's filed a formal complaint claiming that Rex is his property. But we have something he doesn't. This community." Cheers erupted from the crowd, and Emma felt her confidence grow. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Rex was abandoned," she said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "We found him broken and scared. He's not just some trophy or piece of property. He's family." An older woman in the back stood, her voice firm. "That man doesn't deserve to have Rex back. What he did was heartless. I say we make sure the whole town knows what kind of person he really is." Another voice chimed in, this time from a young man. "If he wants a legal battle, let's give him one. I've got connections with the local shelter. We can get affidavits from people who've seen dogs abandoned like Rex." Over the next week, the town became a flurry of activity. Signs were made, letters were sent, and local reporters began covering the story. The protests outside the town hall grew in size, with slogans like "Justice for Rex" and "Animals are not property" drawing attention from surrounding areas. Emma found herself at the center of it all. Reporters interviewed her in front of the barn, cameras capturing her tearful recounting of finding Rex by the creek. She spoke with the kind of raw honesty that resonated with viewers. "I couldn't leave him there," she told a reporter from a regional news station. "He needed someone to care about him. And now he's given us more love than we ever expected." Richard Blake, on the other hand, was growing increasingly frustrated. His attempts to reclaim Rex had turned into a public relations nightmare. Videos of Emma's speech went viral on social media, with hashtags like #SaveRex and #StandWithEmma trending across platforms. Protesters even showed up outside his Los Angeles office, holding signs demanding justice for abandoned animals. In a tense meeting with his legal team, Richard slammed his hand on the table. "This is spiraling out of control," he snapped. "I didn't sign up for this circus." One of his advisors, a younger man with wire-rimmed glasses, hesitated before speaking. "Sir, it might be worth considering backing off. The public isn't on your side, and this could damage your reputation further." Richard scowled. "I don't back down. Ever." Back in Texas, the Johnsons were overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. Neighbors dropped off donations to help with Rex's care, including food, supplies, and even offers to cover veterinary costs. Emma's mother, Sarah, sat at the kitchen table one evening, sorting through envelopes. "People have been so generous," she said, her voice tinged with emotion. "It's more than enough to cover Rex's treatment." Emma, sitting on the floor with Rex's head resting in her lap, smiled. "See, Mom? Everyone knows Rex deserves to stay here." Sarah nodded, her heart swelling with pride. "They believe in him because they believe in you." The solidarity of the town became a force to be reckoned with. When Richard's lawyers returned with a final demand for Rex's surrender, they were met not just by the Johnsons, but by dozens of community members standing shoulder to shoulder in the Johnsons' yard. Signs reading, "Rex stays here," and "No justice for abandoners" filled the air. Richard's representatives retreated, clearly outmatched by the sheer will of the community. As the sun set that evening, Emma stood on the porch with Rex beside her, watching as the last car of supporters drove away. The sense of unity and love was overwhelming, and for the first time in weeks, she felt truly hopeful. "Thank you," she whispered to Rex, scratching behind his ears, "for bringing us all together." Rex let out a soft woof, his tail wagging slowly, as if to say, "You're welcome." The Texas summer sky was streaked with hues of orange and purple as the Johnson family gathered on the front porch, the atmosphere heavy with anticipation. Word had spread that Richard Blake himself was coming back to confront them, this time without lawyers or intermediaries. Emma sat on the steps with Rex lying beside her, his ears alert and his body tense, sensing the unease in the air. "He's not going to take you," Emma whispered to Rex, stroking his head. The dog nuzzled her hand, his amber eyes filled with quiet loyalty. The sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway made everyone look up. Richard's sleek black SUV came into view, the sunlight reflecting off its polished surface. The engine cut off, and moments later, Richard stepped out. This time, he was alone, dressed in a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, his demeanor less polished but no less imposing. He approached the porch with measured steps, his sharp blue eyes scanning the faces of Sarah, Robert, and Emma before settling on Rex. "So," Richard began, his voice steady but laced with irritation, "this is where it's come to. A standoff over a dog." Emma stood, clutching Rex's leash tightly. "He's not just a dog. He's family." Richard smirked, shaking his head. "You're a spirited kid. I'll give you that. But let's be clear. Rex is mine. I have the papers to prove it, and no amount of small-town drama is going to change that." "Papers don't mean anything when you left him to die," Sarah shot back, stepping forward. Her tone was calm but resolute. "You abandoned him, Mr. Blake. That's not what a real owner does." Richard's jaw tightened, but he kept his focus on Emma. "Look, kid, I get it. You found him, you helped him, and now you think he belongs to you. But that dog was bred and trained to compete. He's worth more than you can imagine, and he doesn't belong here." Emma's face flushed with anger. "You don't even know him. You don't know how scared he was when I found him, or how hard he's fought to get better. All you care about is winning." Richard took a step closer, his imposing frame towering over Emma. "And what do you care about? Do you think you can give him the life he was meant for? He's not a pet. He's a competitor. He belongs in the ring, not on some rundown farm." "That's where you're wrong," Robert interjected, his voice firm. "This rundown farm is exactly where he belongs, where he's loved, cared for, and treated with dignity. Something you clearly don't understand." Richard glared at Robert, but his usual confidence faltered. The weight of the community's opposition, the viral news coverage, and now this direct confrontation seemed to chip away at his resolve. Emma stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tears welling in her eyes. "You say Rex belongs with you, but he's happy here. Look at him." She gestured to the dog, who stood protectively by her side, his posture strong and his gaze unwavering. "He doesn't trust you. He doesn't even like you, because he knows what you did." Richard stared at Rex, his expression unreadable. For a moment, the weight of Emma's words seemed to reach him. I didn't mean to hurt him," Richard said quietly, his voice tinged with something resembling regret. "I thought I was doing what was best." Emma shook her head. You don't get to decide what's best for him anymore. You gave up that right when you left him behind. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the faint rustling of the wind. Richard's shoulders sagged slightly, and for the first time, he looked less like a powerful businessman and more like a man struggling with his own failures. Finally, he exhaled deeply and nodded. Maybe you're right, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Maybe he is better off here. Emma's heart leapt, but she stayed rooted, waiting for him to finish. Richard straightened, regaining some of his composure. I'll withdraw the claim, he said, his tone resigned. Rex is yours. A collective sigh of relief washed over the family, but Emma didn't celebrate immediately. You're not just walking away, she said, her voice firm. You need to do better. For Rex and for any other animal you might own. Richard nodded slowly, his eyes meeting hers. I'll think about that. He turned and walked back to his SUV, pausing briefly to glance at Rex one last time. Then, without another word, he got in and drove away, the dust from his tires settling as his car disappeared down the road. As the family stood in stunned silence, Rex let out a low, happy bark, breaking the tension. Emma knelt beside him, throwing her arms around his neck. He's really ours, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Sarah and Robert joined her, their smiles wide and their hearts full. Damn right he is, Robert said with a grin. And no one's ever taking him away again. The weeks following Richard Blake's retreat were transformative, not just for the Johnson family, but for the entire community. Rex, now fully recognized as part of the family, became a symbol of resilience and the power of standing up for what's right. The story of the abandoned dog and the determined girl who saved him continued to resonate far beyond their small Texas town. On a warm Sunday afternoon, the Johnsons hosted a gathering in their barn to thank the neighbors and friends who had supported them through the ordeal. Emma sat on a hay bale with Rex at her side, his sleek black and tan coat shining in the sunlight. His injured leg was still healing, but he was stronger, walking with only a slight limp. Robert stood in the center of the crowd, tapping his cane on the floor to gather everyone's attention. Folks, he began, his voice carrying the weight of gratitude. We wouldn't be here without you. This wasn't just about a dog. It was about standing up for what's right. And because of all of you, we did it. Cheers erupted, and Emma felt her chest swell with pride. She rose to her feet, gripping Rex's leash, and looked out at the crowd. Thank you, she said, her voice trembling but clear. Rex means everything to me, and you all fought for him just as much as I did. I'll never forget it. Mrs. Jenkins, the townsbaker, raised her hand. You inspired us, Emma. If a little girl can stand up to someone like Richard Blake, then so can the rest of us. Laughter and applause filled the barn, and Emma smiled, her cheeks flushing pink. As the event wound down, Emma wandered outside with Rex, the two of them finding a quiet spot beneath a large oak tree. She sat down in the grass, and Rex lay beside her, resting his head on her lap. You know, Rex, she said, stroking his ears, you've changed everything. You brought this whole town together, and you taught me that even when things seem impossible, it's worth fighting for the people, or dogs, you love. Rex let out a contented sigh, his tail thumping softly against the ground. The impact of Rex's story didn't stop at the town's borders. The local news coverage had sparked broader attention, and soon animal welfare groups from across Texas reached out to the Johnsons. Inspired by their fight, the community came together to establish the Rex Rescue Fund, a non-profit organization dedicated to helping abandoned and injured animals find homes. Emma became the face of the movement, her photo alongside Rex appearing in newspapers and on social media. She spoke at events, sharing their story and encouraging others to take a stand for animals in need. One afternoon, as Emma and Rex walked through the bustling downtown area of their town, a little boy ran up to them, holding his mother's hand. Is that Rex? The boy asked, his eyes wide with wonder. Emma smiled and nodded. It sure is. The boy knelt down, and Rex leaned forward to sniff his hand before giving it a gentle lick. He's even cooler than I thought, the boy said, grinning. Thank you for saving him, the mother added, her voice full of sincerity. You've made a difference for so many animals, Emma blushed but managed a soft, "Thank you." Rex made the difference for me, too. At home, the Johnsons' farm had taken on a new life. Volunteers arrived regularly to help care for abandoned animals brought to the Rex Rescue Fund. The once quiet farmhouse now echoed with the playful barks of rescued dogs, the purring of kittens, and the laughter of people united by a common purpose. Rex, now fully healed, became the unofficial ambassador of the rescue. He greeted each new arrival with a wagging tail and a patient demeanor, as if understanding their pain and offering reassurance. One evening, as the family sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Robert leaned back in his chair, his face relaxed. "You know," he said, "I never thought an old farm like this could make such a difference. But that dog, he's changed everything." Sarah nodded, smiling at Emma, who sat on the steps with Rex beside her. "And so did Emma," she said. "She reminded us all what it means to fight for something that matters." Emma looked at Rex, her hand resting on his head. "I didn't do it alone," she said softly. "Rex fought too. He's the bravest dog I've ever met." As the stars began to appear in the sky, the family sat in comfortable silence, their hearts full. The battle for Rex had brought challenges they never expected, but it had also brought hope, purpose, and a bond that would last a lifetime. Rex's journey from abandoned competitor to beloved family member became a story of redemption, courage, and community. And though the fight had ended, its legacy lived on. Proof that even the smallest acts of kindness could spark extraordinary change. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and if you've watched this far, comment "I watched this far" and share your thoughts about this story. Oh, and don't forget to watch the next video that pops up on the end screen. It's super exciting.